we make things. We use our hands, minds, and machines to build, to fix, to improve. We're known as do-it-yourselfers, home improvement fans, fix-it fanatics, inventors. At our core, though, we're all makers. So let's jump in and make something. Hi, I'm Ron Hazelton. Welcome to the show. Now today we're going to see how to add the elegance of crown molding to any room in as little as a couple of hours. It just couldn't be any simpler since there's absolutely no nailing required and the material is lightweight enough to be handled easily by one person. Then we install some do-it-yourself rain gutters and finally top it all off by putting in a Fireplace gas log set that's ultra realistic and push-button convenient. Catch it all right now on HouseCalls. You know, this room has some really nice architectural details. Wainscoting down here, built-in corner cabinet with some columns right here, but there's one thing that's missing, and that's right up here where the wall meets the ceiling. It's crown molding. So right now we're going to put some in, and you're going to be amazed at how easily it goes. The molding I'm using today is manufactured by Creative Crown Molding and available through their network of distributors. It's made of high-density polystyrene foam. The surface is very smooth and the detail is crisp and clean. Because the material is lightweight, it can be easily installed by one person and, best of all, requires no nails or fasteners of any kind, completely eliminating the need to locate wall studs. To begin the installation, I cut a 45-degree miter on the end of one molding section. I can make this cut either by moving the miter saw table to the 45-degree position and setting the molding vertically, or by tilting the blade to a 45-degree bevel and laying the molding flat on the saw bed. Today, I'll be cutting with the material in the vertical position. Rather than using nails, the crown is going to be held in place with caulk. This material from Sherwin-Williams is a paintable, siliconized acrylic latex sealant that immediately bonds the material in place and cleans up easily with water. I cut the nozzle off, leaving an opening of about 1/8 of an inch in diameter. Then use the built-in tool and the caulking gun to puncture the seal at the base of the nozzle. There are two ways to apply the caulk. I can lay a bead about the size of a small drinking straw near the edge of the top and bottom of the molding. When the section is placed on the wall, the excess sealant squeezes out of the joint. It's then cleaned off with this caulk removal tool. Any remaining sealant is wiped away with a damp cloth. The second method is to place the bead of sealant about 1/4 inch away from the edge, set the molding in position, and press firmly with the palm of my hand. In this case, none of the sealant squeezes out, and an additional bead of caulk is added where the molding meets the ceiling and wall. I remove the excess with my finger and clean away any remaining material with a damp cloth. It's a good idea to stop occasionally, rinse the cloth, wring out most of the water, and then continue. Quite surprisingly, I found it unnecessary to use a tape measure for this project. Each wall requires 2 sections of molding. I cut a 45-degree miter on the end of the second piece and set it into position, making sure that the tip of the miter is fully into the corner. Then I mark the spot where the 2 pieces meet. This is a straight cut on the saw with the miter indicator set at 0. Normally, it would be awkward to install conventional nailed-on crown molding behind this built-in corner cabinet. In this case, though, it's easily slipped into place and firmly attached to the wall and ceiling in a matter of seconds. Applying spackle to the ends of the butt joints before installation ensures that there will be a strong bond front to back that will prevent the joint from moving. As the 2 pieces of molding are pressed together, excess spackle squeezes out the front. It's easily removed either with a plastic card or the caulk removal tool. This spackle has a dry time indicator. It goes on pink but turns white when it's dry. I like to fold my sandpaper into thirds before using it. This makes the sandpaper pad stiffer, yet pliable enough to conform to the molding profile. Rolling the sandpaper into a small cylinder allows me to get into the curved sections. Sealant is applied to each mitered end. Here, too, where the sections are pressed together, any excess squeezes out. It can be easily smoothed out with a finger and cleaned up with a damp cloth. Because the molding is bright white and the surface is perfectly smooth, one coat of high-quality water-based paint is usually all that's required. Applying masking tape to the wall and ceiling allows the molding to be painted in place without any mess. However, I think painting the molding before installation is easier and quicker. Once I get familiar with the process, the project moves along surprisingly fast. There's no noise, mess, or frustration. A room like this can be completed in a couple of hours, most often without the need to move the furniture. This new and improved high-density polystyrene molding from Creative Crown is extremely stable and does not expand or contract, eliminating the possibility of future gaps in the joints. The material also has a Class A fire rating and is made right here in America. Now that completes the room, and can you believe how easy it was? From plain to classic in a couple of hours.
Our first house call today is in West Chester, Pennsylvania. Now for Jim and Janine Breslin, living in this 18th century farmhouse is a delight, but it does have its share of problems. Water, for instance.
Good morning, folks.
Hi, Ron.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Ron, how are you?
Pleasure to meet you both. Yeah, what a beautiful house this
Thank
is.
you.
This is like,
Thank
it looks like an old farmhouse here.
The house was originally built in 1732,
Really?
and we moved in a little over 2 years ago.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
I understand you've got a drainage problem.
Yes.
Now, why don't you show me what's going on?
Sure. Well, when we bought the house, the house did not have any gutters.
Jim quickly pointed out that the water just pours from the roof, creating, among other things, a rotted porch. So our first task is to figure out the slope of the eaves, which tells us where the water naturally flows. This $2 item, called a line level, attaches to a string, allowing us to create a level as long as we need it, in this case 36 feet.
Raise it up. Let me know when it's level now.
Okay, it looks level.
This is how much out of level, right here, this distance, the roof is at this end compared to that end. But we can use that to our advantage.
A gutter attached to this long portion of porch roof will be naturally sloped, carrying rainwater toward one end and eventually into a downspout. All gutters must slope at least 1/4 inch for every 10 linear feet to provide proper drainage. This section of the roof, on the other hand, is nearly level, so we strike a level reference line, then a second mark 1/4 inch below the line to indicate the correct slope. This portion of gutter will have a 90-degree turn or elbow on each end. To determine the proper length for the straight section, we hold the elbows in place and mark their ends. From this mark, we subtract 1/4 inch to allow room for the seams that we'll install later.
Okay, Jim, put it on the 1/4 inch mark there. All right, and 67. Rain gutters are made of aluminum, copper, plastic, even wood. But aluminum seems to be the most popular variety, probably because it's inexpensive and easy to install. If you go out to buy them, you'll usually find them in 10-foot sections like this. They're measured and cut to length and then hooked together with special connectors. I'll show you more about that in a second. Right now, let's cut this first section. We had 67 inches up there. Take the tape measure, measure down from this end, make a mark at 67 inches. Then use a combination square to carry that line all the way around the gutter.
Now we're ready to cut. Heavy-duty tin snips are the best tool to use for this job, and there is a technique. Start at the top and cut down the face of the gutter first. Then make the second cut down the back. Finally, crease the gutter and make the third and final cut across the bottom. Careful now, these are razor-sharp edges. We'll use hanging brackets to attach the gutter to the edge of the eaves. The manufacturer suggests placing brackets about 6 inches from each end and then every 18 to 24 inches. We then snap the brackets into place and head up to the roof. To mount the gutters, we'll drive a screw through each bracket and into the faceboard on the eaves. To the last section of gutter, we'll connect a downspout. While Janine holds the gutter in place, I mark the location of the downspout hole. This sleeve will connect the downspout to the gutter. Now, to install it, we have to cut a square hole in the bottom of the gutter. Those are the lines that we just drew for position. We can actually use this sleeve as a template. We'll just lay it on top and trace the outline with a pencil. In order to cut out the downspout opening, we'll first make a punch mark at each corner. Then Janine will drill starter holes and cut the opening using a jigsaw. When she's finished, I file the edges smooth.
We want to put some sealant on.
Next, we apply a silicone sealant to the lip of this downspout connector
A nice healthy bead right
and
around.
place it into the cutout.
And we'll drop that right down in there. Press it into place.
Janine secures the downspout connector with short sheet metal screws. Since this will be the last gutter section in the run, we'll need to install an end cap. The cap is slipped into place, then the edges are crimped to hold it securely. With the downspout sleeve in place, we'll hang the gutter. With the gutter attached to the faceboard,
Okay, what have you
Janine and
got,
I
Janine?
measure the length for our downspout.
75. Okay, good. Now the two ends on a piece of downspout may look the same, but actually they're not. One end is tapered, like this one, so that it will slip into the end of the next section. Now when you're cutting downspout, always cut off the larger end, never cut off the taper. And when you're installing it, make sure that the large end is up and the tapered end is down. Here's why. If the large end faces down, water will leak out through the joint. But if the large end faces up, water will flow past the joint without leaking. It's time to assemble the downspout and do a test fit.
Okay.
Uh-oh. Now, this is something I hadn't counted on. The bottom is hitting the concrete down here.
Okay.
The solution here is to cut some wooden spacers from 2x4 lumber. Aluminum mounting straps are then screwed to the spacers and attached to the posts with screws. Now we can slip the downspout assembly over the connector and secure it in place with screws. Then we fold the aluminum mounting straps around the downspouts and attach them with screws. Our last step is to connect the straight sections of gutter to each other and the corner angles using this 2-inch strip of aluminum called a seamer. It overlaps the joints and fills in the 1/4-inch gap we left earlier. The joints are made watertight by applying a heavy bead of sealant on the inside.
Well, that should do it, guys. Let the sealer dry overnight, and then tomorrow take a garden hose and put it in this end of the gutter. Check to make sure the water is flowing this way and going into the downspout, okay? And that it's not leaking at the joints. And you've got this gorgeous maple tree right here. Unfortunately, it's going to dump a lot of leaves into these gutters, so I'd put up some leaf guards all the way around, especially on this end. It was a pleasure working with you.
Well,
you
it was
were
great
wonderful
working
with
with
the
you.
hand tools.
Thanks a lot, Ron.
Oh, you're very welcome. Jim, all the best to you.
Thank you.
And guys, enjoy the gutters, huh?
Thank you.
Thanks.
Welcome to the Fireplace Tales, a rather sooty story of a man, his wife, and their gas log set. It all began when...
In order to light this fireplace, you have to stick your hand in the fireplace to light it.
Hey, that's no big deal. I just reached
It is a big deal. Do you remember the last time you singed all your hair off the hand?
That scared the wee-wee out of me.
Is the gas still on?
I guess we could say, Lynn, that was a point well made.
So what's the moral of this story? Well, I guess you could say it's that when your wife suggests you might want to update your gas log set to one that doesn't require you to put your hand inside to light it, you should listen. I did, and that's why I'm going to replace this gas log set with one that's state-of-the-art.
I start by shutting off the gas to the fireplace. Then remove the artificial logs and take out the grate. Next, I disconnect the gas line, remove the old burner, and last of all, clean out the firebox. Well, the fireplace is all cleaned out, and I'm about to put in my new gas log set. It has three components: the burner, the logs, and this wireless remote control. More about this a little bit later on. Right now, I want to start by putting in the burner and attaching it to the bottom of the firebox. The first step is to apply pipe thread sealant, then attach the gas supply line to the burner and snug the connection up tightly. This system has remote control electronic ignition. The small receiver simply plugs into the control box. Next, I set the burner in position, use a masonry bit to drill holes into the brick on the bottom of the firebox, and finally, put in masonry screws to secure the burner in place. Well, the log set's installed. I've attached the gas line. Now I want to check to see if there are any leaks. So I'm going to turn the gas back on. And I'm going to take this bottle of soapy water, just dishwashing detergent in water here, and I'm going to spray it on all the connections and fittings down here. Now, if there were a leak, I'd see some fairly substantial soap bubbles. Hopefully, I won't find any. Now for what is probably going to be the most fun part of this job, putting the actual logs on the burner. Now these are made of concrete and they have to go in a very specific way, but it's easy because the bottoms of the logs have holes and the burner down here has pins, so all I've got to do is match them up. Well, the burner's installed, the logs are in place. But what comes next is what's going to make this look like a convincing wood-burning fire. It's called an accessory kit, and it's an option from the manufacturer of this log set, Empire Comfort Systems. Let me show you how it works. First, I sprinkle small blackened coals that look like remnants of earlier fires. Next, I drop in a few of these ash-coated coals for added realism, then place some small, partially burned pieces of wood around the base of the logs. All of these materials, of course, are non-combustible. Finally, small pieces of rock wool are placed over special ports in the burner. When the log set is operating, these tufts of rock wool will glow like hot coals. Pretty convincing, isn't it? And you know the best thing of all? I can turn that fireplace off and on from right here in my easy chair using this remote control. And this is also a thermostat. By presetting the room temperature I want, this will automatically turn the log set on and off, keeping the room at just the temperature I want it. Well, that's it from Fireplace Theater. Join us next time for Tales of the Andiron.
To view today's projects again and countless more, go to HouseCallsDIY.com. Step-by-step home improvement tips when you need them.
I'm Brian Kelsey. Welcome to House Calls.
Join us as we tackle some great home projects, as well as look back at favorites from Ron Hazelton on House Calls.